Good evening, Shavua Tov, a good week. We should all see wonderful things. Two hostages in Israel were released, thank God, and whatever there is behind the decision, it's still a wonderful thing and should continue. Tonight, we're going to talk about the miracles of war. You know, it's like a contradiction, really, but we're really not in a war because a war is between two armies. And Hamas is fighting against our civilians every chance they get. And it seems to me a rather cowardly proposition to call a war against civilians a war. You know, it's more like these people are just attacking the weak and the unarmed and the vulnerable, which is something we see in the Bible in the story of Amalek, one of the nations that attacked Israel, the Israelites, when they came out of Egypt from the first redemption. And now we're coming back in force as a nation. And who's attacking us again? Amalek, you know. And that's only two occasions in Jewish history. So God has assigned these people like the worst job of all because they volunteered. God doesn't force anyone into evil. He doesn't force anyone into good. But rather he leads Migalgel Zechut Aida Zakai. He brings about merit to those who have merit. And Megalgel Chov Aida Chayav. And he brings guilt to those who are guilty. The people volunteer for where they're at. And that's unfortunate but true. Now, miracles. We got some miracle stories I want to tell tonight. It's Saturday night. It's a good time for telling stories. I hope you share these stories with everyone you know. Either share the video or tell them yourself. The first one is a true story that I heard from a friend of mine who heard it from the father who had an estranged son. They were a religious family. The son decided he didn't want to be religious anymore. He went off the derech and he kind of disappeared into his life, and the father didn't know where he was. The night after the original attack on October 7th, the father is sleeping and his son comes to him in a dream. And his son is glowing white. And he's holding a Talmud, a very large book, to his heart. And it's shining gold. And he said to his father, Abba, don't worry about me. I'm fine. Everything is great. I'm learning Torah, the Masechet, the Talmud that I learned when I was a kid in grade school, in Cheder, and now I'm learning with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So don't worry about me. And the father woke up from his dream of his son that he hadn't seen or heard from in a while. And he woke up and said, what was that dream? And later in the day, the phone rang, and he was told that his son had been killed at that festival outside Asa. So this tells us a lot of things. First of all, it tells us the merit of the father and the merit of the son. To have a communication like that gives comfort to a bereaving parent. And the son himself is now learning Torah in the highest yeshiva in the universe. And, you know, there's a statement I heard when this story was told that if a person's doing a sin, and at that moment he's killed because he's a Jew, he still goes to the high places in heaven. So we can't calculate, and we shouldn't try. And we shouldn't, you know, attempt to figure it out. Because once we do that, we're putting our little mind in a very big matrix. And we can't hold all the information, and we certainly can't judge the information properly. What happens, happens. We're Jews. We have to believe that there is tzedek, righteousness, and justice in the universe. Otherwise, the universe couldn't stand, and certainly the human race. Now, that's just one story. Another story was about a friend of mine's son who was there at this festival, and he managed to extract a bunch of friends that were running, and he hid them all in a bush or a wooded thicket or something like that. And he kept going back to get more friends to hide them. And in the end, his girlfriend wanted to stay with him, and he said, "No, no, no, go into the trees and hide yourself." And in the end, she made it out, but her boyfriend didn't. But he managed to save some souls, and what a heroic act. The same type of story was a man came out of one of the communities along that whole front, and there was a police jeep driving by, and he jumped on it, and then they went up and down shooting when they could, and they were hit in the legs by gunfire, and at a certain point they decided to hide because they saw that they weren't going to escape with the numbers of forces that were against them. So they hid it on off the highway in some type of embankment, and 2 hours later, an Israeli team came along with their vehicle, and they saw them in the distance, and they started to shoot. And one of the gentlemen, who was a civilian from a local community, he stood up and he said, "No, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew." And the squad leader screamed out, Stop your fire! It's a Jew. Look, he has tzitzit." And you understand the context here with the war and the stress and the instantaneous decision making that has to take place. And he saw the tzitzit, the little stringed garments that we wear on the edge of our clothes, right? These little strings. Where are mine? Oh, they're under here somewhere. Well, these little strings, right? You think they're just strings, right? Well, they are just strings, but they're not. Because once God commands us in the Bible to wear them, they carry the will of the Creator on them. And that will is beyond the wool and the sheep and the person who made them, right? That will of God is on that mitzvah for all eternity. Now, those mitzvot, those tzitzit saved his life, because otherwise he could easily have been an Arab dressed up in a uniform. He could have been undercover. So, in other words, we see again a miracle of a mitzvah. Now, another story similar to that was a story I heard from a friend who also heard it from the source. There was another young man who was born and raised religious, and he decided he didn't want to be so religious anymore. And he went off and got a job driving people, a van service, taking people from the airport to various places. And he picked up a religious family from the States, and they wanted to go directly to this particular Rebbe that they had heard about, a holy man who's purported to have divine inspiration. And so he said, "Okay, I know where he lives. I'll take you there." And they got in the van. They drove from the airport to the rabbi's house, and they were received. And each of the members of the family from the States got a blessing. And then the driver, this formerly religious guy who wasn't so into it at the time, he was there at the end of the group, and the Rebbe said, come here." And he said, "Don't you want a blessing also?" And he said, "Well, I'm not so religious. It's okay. I'm fine. Thank you." And the rabbi said, "No, just one thing. Keep Shabbat for the month of Tishrei." Now, Tishrei, of course, is the Jewish festival month. We have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and that terrible day where joy turned into tragedy on Simchat Torah, Shmini Atzeret, where the war began. Now, that was a Shabbat. And the young man, he left. He took his family out to their hotel, and he went back to his life. Weeks later, there's a festival outside Gaza, and a bunch of his friends want to go. And he has a van. And they say, "Well, why don't we all go together in your van?" And he has not listened to the Rebbe to keep all those 4 Shabbatot of Tishrei. But here we are at this group of his friends wanted him to drive them to the festival. and stay and party. It's an all-nighter, plus. And so on the way, his heart keeps beating the way I heard that story told. And he kept remembering that Rebbe's words, keep the Shabbat during Tishrei. Just keep the Shabbat. He said, well, if I go to this festival, I'm not going to keep the Shabbat. And so he said, guys, I can't do this. We got to turn around. I'm not going to the festival. They said, what do you mean? You agreed to drive us. We're all together. You can keep the Shabbat at the festival. He said, no, it's not the right spirit. It's not the right place. I'm going to turn around. You guys can get out and get a ride, whatever you want. And then they said, well, why are you turning around now? And he said, well, he told them the story about the Rebbe giving them a blessing. And these are all not religious guys. So, but a simple Jew has great faith. We don't exactly know how to compare each other's faith, because faith is one of these mercurial powers that comes to you when you need it, and then sometimes it disappears from you when you're being tested. And faith, as everyone knows, is up and down depending on our other deeds in our life, our expansion of consciousness through prayer, meditation, etc. And his friends heard the story about the Rebbe, and they said, okay, you know what, we'll all go back to Jerusalem and keep Shabbat. And so that none of them were caught there in that firestorm at that horrible festival. And so these stories should give us a little bit of faith. And we hear the stories of the righteous because it builds our faith, and it also elevates our consciousness. That instead of hearing the silly stories that are all over the internet or coming out of Hollywood or anywhere else, we're hearing stories of human struggle and victory, and the victory of goodness over evil, and the victory of darkness, the victory of light over darkness, and of course of what we call denial is also defeated by faith. Because once you see that God is with us, you can turn back a little bit. You can decide not to be so religious, but in your heart, you know the truth. And you'll come back to the truth in the moment of trial. And this is what some of these stories teach us. And so let's not worry about the word religious. Let's just worry about one thing, our relationship to the Creator. One-on-one, face up, you and your Creator. It's inside your heart, inside your mind. The Zohar says, Meitzitz mer harakim is a verse from Shir Hashirim that says, that God is peeking behind the cracks in the blinds. He's looking in through the places where we have little cracks, little places where we're not sure, little doubts where we don't know. But when we understand that either there is one God or there is no God, because all the others is too complicated to have more than one. And if there's no God, then there's no way that this creation would hold together. And when we as Jews keep the Torah and the mitzvot as best we can, each person at their level, growing at their pace, loving and being happy about their choices along the way, then that's how we're made to be. We're not all made to be cookie cutters. We're not all made to be replicas. We're all made to be exactly the way we are and go forward from there. And that is the beginning of the renewal of our people, and that renews the rest of the world. And you'll see it in the relationship. If you study the history and you study the news, you'll see that what happens in Israel happens in the greater world as well. And we should have mercy and pray for the entire world, because what happened here a few weeks ago, we see that it's happened in the big world in various ways, in various forms. And this jihad, this global jihad, is not a joke. People inside, they understand. For them, they ripped off the Messianic movement of the Jews, and they said, no, we're the Messianic people. That's what Islam believes and preaches. So, does it sound familiar? This taking the Messianic concept and self-applying it, and this is what global jihad is about: world domination and power. And it's something we have to face, and with courage and unity, and understanding that if we don't fight, then, well, what happens when you don't fight the fight? You lose by default. And that's what's happened throughout history, and we can't be part of that anymore. The Jewish people are here to win, and we're here to win with all the people that choose the one God. So we shall be blessed with that faith, see the big picture, see the unfolding of the redemption of the Jewish people and our return to the land and our return to Torah, return to our traditions, return to our purity. And when you see all of that, you'll see how it's all happening perfectly the way it's supposed to. And we can only increase and accelerate the process of this tremendous, tremendous redemption. God bless you all. Shavua Tov.